Can everyone hear me okay? Yes? No? Yeah? Okay. Thank you all for coming out. This is 8th Light University. My name is Kevin Buchanan. My talk today is stress testing for better software developers. And this is a talk about stress. More specifically, it's a talk about how we handle stress. Writing software involves a lot of stressful things. We have deadlines, communication among different people and teams. We have never-ending things to learn, pressure we put on ourselves to learn new things, generally complex problems to solve. And generally, I don't think we're very well adapted to managing stress or even thinking about what stress actually is. So my goal today is to make you more aware of this thing we call stress, so you can be better at identifying both the challenges and the benefits that stress brings to you and your software. And at the end of this talk, I hope we can just get better at filtering out the noise and being able to better identify and solve the real problems of our software and that we encounter during software development. So let's start by talking about software in particular. And let's start when we've written enough code to ship it to production or some sort of live environment. So, we deploy our code. If we're responsible, like I know most of us are, we enable ourselves to monitor our application. We provide enough logging in our system so that we're always able to see what's happening in our environment. And we hopefully set up some monitoring in our environment where we can get signals about things that are happening in our application. And we can use tools like Splunk, New Relic, and Nagios to do this kind of monitoring based on the logging and the signals we've told our application to provide. So then we gather and analyze these signals. Using these tools, we can create an environment with plenty of signals and know about what's happening in our system. Some of these signals are good, some of them are bad, some of them are just information. Maybe we had ideas about what these signals should mean, these logging statements, or however we're logging, monitoring what these things should mean. They mean different things. And then we set up some sort of alert system. We have these signals. We set up some alerting mechanism to notify us when things are happening. And these can be done through your end delivery mechanism. Could be Slack, HipChat, email, whatever you decide. So we alert it. We start getting alerts. We probably get more than one. We get a lot of alerts. We actually just get inundated with alerts. We get tons of alerts. Our email inbox starts looking like this. Start out with tons of alerts. What even is an alert? We don't really know. So we end up treating everything like we think it might be worth knowing, regardless of what it actually means. We're not sure what it actually means. We're just inundated with alerts. And how do we figure out how to filter out the signal versus noise and all this? This is the challenge. At this point, we're really bad at filtering out what's important from what's not important with all these signals coming in. There's stuff happening that seems unordinary, but we're not sure. We assume it might be bad because we got an alert, right? But we don't know. We don't know how to separate from the things that are critical, from the things that are warning, from the things that are just information that we're sending out. So we have to get to work. We have to get to work, shoveling ourselves out of this pile of alerts that we're on, that we're just buried in. So we can apply tools to filter out this noise, right? We can perform some work, we can get better at this, and we can find what the real important information is in here. And we can do this by running tests, right? We can investigate this and run some tests and explore, what's actually happening in our software. So the first step might be what we might call a performance test in the realm of software testing. We're trying to find out how our system is performing. And here we're just establishing baselines. We want to establish a baseline, some specs, some metrics that we want to know about, maybe CPU usage, response time, things like that. We can do this, and we're monitoring our signals all along, right? We have our logging, we have our alerts. We're monitoring, what does this look like is what we're trying to get at. And we probably assume that the signals that we see when we're performance testing, is kind of normal. It's our baseline. And after we performance test, we can progress through what we might call a load test, where we're finding out where the system is currently for our use cases. And this would be expected use cases, right? This is like expected scenarios, things that are within the realm of possibility, things that we expect to happen in our application. These could be how we perform, like with a certain number of simultaneous users or simultaneous requests. Along the way, we probably find that these expected use cases aren't always handled properly in our system, so then we fix those bugs, we fix those performance problems, applying our expected scenarios. So this is an example using a tool called Ruby Jmeter, which is just a Ruby library on top of Jmeter, which is very useful for these kinds of tests. So here, as an example, we might send like 10 concurrent requests to get all the posts. And we might see that's an expected scenario we have in our use cases, and we expect that to be handled properly. So we do that, we see what happens, and we go from there. But what if we want to find out more than that? We found out what our application looks like under expected load and expected use cases. But what if we want to do better than that? What if we want to be able to figure out the signal from the noise in our alerts, and we want to know that what happens, anything outside of these normal patterns. We want to know what happens when something actually harmful happens in our app. How do we know what our app looks like when it's actually breaking? What does failure actually look like? For this, we employ a stress test. So something outside of our normal use cases could be harmful, but how do we know? We don't actually know until we investigate it by pushing the system to failure. And then once we're performing this test, we're again monitoring our alerts, our activity in our system, these signals that it's sending to us, and we figure out, do we actually need to take action on some of these signals? What do these actually mean? Find out what the upper limits are of our system. Again, a simple, completely made up example here is, we're just increasing our concurrent threads to 100 or some level where it forces our app to break at some point, right? We start sending back 500s. We start not handling this the way we would expect, and we get it to a place where we would want an alert, right? We would want some email saying, look, things aren't working properly. So once we do this, the key after this is we have to adjust our perception. We have to now adjust our perception of alerts, of warnings, of messages, and figure out, what should we actually be notified about? What are the signals? What are the system limits? And adjust our alerting and our monitoring based on our new view, our new perception of our application in our environment. So we separate our, quote unquote warnings versus real warnings. For example, prior to the stress testing, maybe we had a lot of warning level log messages or something like that triggered alerts. These were logged under conditions that we thought could possibly cause an error, right? But it's just a warning. By definition, nothing actually went wrong, right? It's just something could have gone wrong. We're not really sure. We're going to warn you about it. So now that we understand, what the limits of our system are, we can go back and adjust this. We can say, what we thought was a warning before is actually being handled fine. Or something that we thought was being handled fine previously is actually, legitimate problem. So we can update our perception of our environment. And we can give more weight to the real issues, right? Like I said, if we had real warnings before that weren't, alerted on, or if we had alerts on things that shouldn't have been alerted on, we give more weight to the real issues and we filter out the signal from the noise. So what are the results of all this testing? So what we have is a system that's been evaluated in terms of what it needs to perform and what performance under a certain set of situations actually looks like. So we have a stronger system, right? We've pushed it to the point of failure. We've exposed potential problems. We've improved it for the better, and we made a stronger system. And we've made a smarter system as well. We've given the system a better way to signal when and where real problems might occur. And we are more, we understand our system a lot better, so it can more smartly tell us what's going on and what's happening in our application, in our software. And I think the overarching theme here is that this is an intentional, controlled stress. That's the benefit that we get out of performing these tests. And this isn't a new concept, right? Like, we see this concept being employed in a lot of software tools, and we're good at this in software. For the most part, this is an accepted practice, applying this controlled stress to our software. I think one of the most prolific, popular examples would be Netflix's, Chaos Monkey, Chaos Kong. And recently, they kind of aggregated all those ideas into the principles of chaos, which is experimenting on a distributed system in order to build confidence in the system's capability to withstand turbulent conditions in production. So they're applying stress to their software and adjusting their software from there. We're good at this in software. We have tools to do this. But you might be saying, stress. You keep using this word stress. What does this actually mean? What is this word stress? Is that the same thing as, maybe this that we see on the news a lot? Stressful jobs make life shorter. Is this the same sort of stress as this? How stress makes you sick? What are we talking about here? Are we talking about the same thing? Obviously, we're using the same word, but is it the same thing? The stress that we use to improve our software system, is it the same stress that we constantly read about, has negative effects on our health, our physical and mental health? To figure that out, we really need to take a closer look at this word, figure out what does this word stress actually mean. We can look at some definitions. It has multiple definitions. The mechanical definition would be the force across a small boundary per unit of area of that boundary. That's not relevant. That's not what we're talking about. The psychological definition is a feeling of strain and pressure, which seems kind of a little circular to me. Stress is the feeling of stress. Okay, that's not very helpful. I like the physiological definition of stress. Stress is a physiological response to an environmental condition. Physiological meaning related to the organism or the system. So I like this definition. Let's go with this. So we can think about stress as responses to environmental conditions. And these responses to environmental conditions can be good, in which we call eustress. The good feelings you get through exercise, through happiness, through joy is actually eustress. Or they can be negative, and we call this distress. And what's interesting is our body can't actually distinguish between eustress and distress. It's all just an interpretation of our mind. It's just purely influenced by our mind's interpretation of the signals that we're receiving. Via our sight, our hearing, our senses are interpreted by our mind and interpreted into eustress and distress. And this sounds exactly what we do with our software, right? We have this application. We're sending messages to us. We don't really know what these messages mean. It's up for our interpretation. Just like the eustress and distress in our own minds, we filter out our software signals into eustress and distress. So, like what we used in software testing, this process of increasing stress and actively filtering out signal from noise can be very beneficial. Studies have proved this. In a study in Harvard, subjects were put through stressful social situations after being told to rethink the stress response as helpful. And what they found that before the experiment, they were told that their pounding heart, their heavy breathing is actually all part of the body preparing for performance in a better way. So they put a good slant on these feelings that people usually get when undergoing stressful situations. And after doing that, they found that the people that they told this to actually responded to these stressful situations in a good way. Their blood vessels actually stayed relaxed, whereas usually in a distress situation, our blood vessels are constricted. And these subjects actually looked more like what happens in moments of joy than moments of, distress, simply by telling them that their stress was a good signal. And then what this led them to conclude is that stress may only be bad for you if you believe that to be the case. Again, but what about, all this bad stuff we hear about stress? What are we supposed to make of this? Clearly, there's something going on here that's bad for us. Well, I think this is a difference between chronic and acute stress. Chronic being long-lasting stress, acute being, applied for a specified amount of time. And chronic stress is unequivocally bad for us. We know this. Studies show that chronic stress is bad for us. This is stress related to our health, our finances, our jobs, things that happen day after day that we have no control over. And these have, terrible effects on our mind and body. And it comes down to a controlled versus uncontrolled stress. Uncontrolled a stress is going to be a chronic stress that is harmful for us. So we get no benefit out of continuously, leaving our systems in this state where they're under a severe amount of stress that we can't control. This would be bad for our software as well, right? We don't leave our software in a continuous state of a stress test. It's not beneficial. We're just continuously, out of memory, and we need more memory, or we just need less activity on our application. That's not beneficial. Chronic stress on our software is completely different than applying a stress test to our software. But I think we know this. I think we know that things like exercise and deliberate practice and certain struggles in life makes us better. I don't think this is, a new thing. We know that exercise is good for us. On a spectrum, we have, we can be sedentary when we're getting little stress to no stress. We can exercise and provide some stress to our body and we get healthier. But we can also overexert ourselves, right? We can develop chronic injuries from not taking time off and resting. The same goes for the concept of fasting, right? Fasting has been a cultural part of many religions like Eastern Orthodoxy and Islam for a long time. So on one hand, we have like normal eating, and then we have fasting, which is denying food for a short, controlled amount of time. And studies have actually shown that this can be beneficial for blood pressure and blood cholesterol. But then if we do that all the time, it's just starvation. That's not beneficial. So we know about the spectrum of providing a controlled stress. We have platitudes like this: what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. There's no education like adversity. But I think this is boring if I sit up here and tell you about this. We all already know this. It's not going to be interesting for me to tell you what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But the interesting part is we still hate adversity. As much as we all believe all these things, we still hate adversity. As much as we like to say that failure is the key to success and things like that, we still all hate failing as well. And it feels terrible, and we're bad with coping with it. But why is that? So I think what we're highlighting here is that we have a difference between our pre-stress mind, the one that likes all these ideas, and our in-stress mind, what happens to us when we actually encounter these situations. Our pre-stress mind looks like this. Yeah, learning from failure, taking risks, disrupt yourself. Yeah, I'm going to be so cool. That's our pre-stress mind. We like all these ideas. But our in-stress mind looks like this. Oh no, I hate losing. This is terrible. Get me out of here. Why did I do this? This is so stressful. There's this conflict between our pre-stress mind and our in-stress mind. And we see this all the time. We see this in politics. Gallup reports that 50% of people love their congressman but hate Congress, right? Congress needs to make more sacrifices. They need to, come to concessions and compromises more often. But not my sacrifices, not my concessions. My congressman's fighting for the right things. That's really stressful for me. Dare I say, this happens with apprenticeship too. We all value apprenticeship. It's an important part of what we do here at 8th Light and software in general. We like to be a mentor, but how often do we actively put ourselves in the position to be a mentee and subject to that criticism and critique? We like these ideas, not so much when we're actually part of the stressful cycle of these ideas. And that's because our brains like to be happy. Our brains like to be happy, they like to be comfortable, and they're going to apply biases and heuristics to choose the path of least resistance and keep us comfortable. And because of this, brains would be really bad testers. Brains are really bad at testing. It would be like if our brain started our stress test with our software. First alert comes in, our brain's just going to turn off that test. It doesn't like that at all. It'd be a lot less work to just stop testing. Let's stop this right now and let's go back to being happy and comfortable. That's what our brains are wired to do. So what I think we need to do is, just like we do in software, is actually actively apply our monitoring tools to identify, what stress signals we should ignore, which ones are important, know when we're engaged in controlled acute stress and when it's beneficial, and when it's not beneficial, when we found ourselves in, chronic uncontrolled stress. That way we can actively engage in controlled stress and benefit from that. So, we started with software. How does stress tests apply to software developers? And we can look at this through a few topics. I'm going to touch on communication, professionalism, and learning. Let's start with communication. Communication is a huge topic, but I think it's a simple enough place to start, and especially interesting when talking about stress. For a lot of people, including myself, with a good amount of social anxiety, stress and communication are pretty much one and the same. So this goes hand in hand with stress. So how do we apply the idea of stress testing to our communication skills? Well, the thing about communication is that our brains love certainty. Certainty gives us comfort. And our brain loves to be certain about things. And this leads us to the tendency of being stubborn, right? Our tendency to be stubborn is a product of our brain actively avoiding the stress that comes with ambiguity. Our brains hate ambiguity. And researchers have found that even a small amount of ambiguity increases activity in our amygdala, which is a structure in our brain that responds to threats. Information flows into the amygdala, and the amygdala are responsible for filtering the signals and mobilizing a response. And at the same time, when we're in situations of ambiguity, our brain, the part of our brain that responds to our rewards actually shows less activity with increased ambiguity. So stress is increased with ambiguity by lowering the response to our good parts of our brain, and increasing the response to our amygdala. So to say that we like certainty was a complete, understatement. Our brains actively perceive lack of certainty as a threat. It's not just, not that it's not comfortable, it's a threat to in our minds. And this affects the way we communicate, right? We're strongly influenced by confirmation bias. We like to hear things that confirm our existing beliefs. We don't like to risk engaging or feeling uncertain about things when we air our opinions, and generally leads to, we don't like to voice our opinions as simply opinions. We like to voice them as facts, because if we voice them as opinions, that introduces a level of ambiguity that our brains don't like. So our brains tell us we're right. So when we communicate, it's often as if we're stating, facts rather than opinions that our brains have convinced us are facts. And psychologists here again have shown that as we get better in, embracing less closure in our opinions, less cognitive closure in the way we approach communication and engaging with others, we actually get more creative. We become better creative problem solvers as we increase our tolerance for, less cognitive closure, more ambiguity. So communication is better when nobody is worried about being right. But the thing is, you're still going to worry. You're still going to worry about being right. It's just the way we're wired. So rather than sitting back and avoiding the stress of open communication, we're better served by seeking out communication and embracing this ambiguity, embracing this stress that comes with it. Communication where we openly admit that we could be wrong, or just communication where we're not even sure if we should be saying anything. That's ambiguity in itself. So what happens? We need to dive into this ambiguity, and we need to become more comfortable diving into it and knowing that it's going to increase our stress levels, but it's an acute controlled stress that is going to make us better at communicating. And we can do this, a few ways. Writing, speaking, embracing discussion. These are all ways to throw our ideas out there, become more comfortable with diving deep into topics that we thought we knew a lot about, but as we dive deeper, figure out, it's a little more ambiguous whether we actually know about these topics and are as skilled in them. We need to throw our ideas out there through all these things like writing, speaking, embracing discussion. And we actively make improvements when we get these signals that tell us, maybe we're wrong about something or we have gaps in our knowledge that need to be filled. So, second topic is professionalism. And when we're talking about professionalism, there's a lot of things that go into professionalism. The first thing we can start with is accountability. Accountability is a big part of professionalism, in my opinion. Professionals hold themselves to high standards. They hold themselves accountable for meeting those standards. But again, accountability is very stressful. We don't always like it, but subjecting ourselves to more accountability can make us better professionals. We just need a few strategies, for subjecting ourselves to higher accountability. One way of doing this is public commitment. We can increase our controlled stress by putting ourselves out there and making a commitment that's public, that everyone knows about. When we make a public commitment, it definitely increases our pressure we're under. But again, research shows that this short-term pressure effectively increases our motivation and leads to more success. There's subtleties to this, though. One study conducted showed that making commitments is actually more effective in people who are susceptible to normative influence. Normative influence just means that you care about people's opinions of you. And what's interesting about this is, in the context of our stress tests, is that we're a lot more successful when we make this public commitment and when it's tied to us caring more about what people think about us. In the study I mentioned, subjects were 105% more successful when they increased the stress level twofold, once for making a public commitment and once for being someone who hates to let people down. So it's, they documented that these two things hand in hand, while increasing stress levels, actually make people more successful. And this is kind of counterintuitive to the way we typically think about stress like this, right? We typically frame accountability in a way that makes people feel as though, there shouldn't be any pressure, thinking that more stress will hinder them. But what the research actually shows is, if we just simply embrace the stress that comes with accountability of a short-term commitment and the fear of possibly disappointing people, we actually increase our motivation and are more likely to succeed. Another, side of this is doing it solo. The researchers further concluded that there is another caveat to this public commitment, is that when we rely on a partner to help us achieve our goals, it decreases our chance of success. Because, like I said, our brains like to be happy, they like to be comfortable, they're lazy. What ends up happening is that our brains keep trying to outsource this accountability to the other person. Our brains are stingy with energy, and they want to be happy. So when we expect a lot of support from another partner, we have less self-control, we procrastinate more, and we expend less energy to achieve our goal. The third part of this, to increase accountability, is to expect feedback right away. And we can ratchet up the accountability by expecting feedback, as soon as we get done with our commitment. Again, going back to the same study, researchers showed that students' performances on tests showed they were more successful on the test, they had higher test scores when they expected feedback more quickly. The proximity of potential reward or disappointment is a big motivational factor for our minds. This is kind of a creepy slide, but if we want to be a better professional, we can't simply avoid stress and avoid the stress that comes with accountability. We need to create short-term controlled shreddings for us to increase the stress that comes with accountability. Under these conditions, we can find out we find out how well we respond to change in the goals we've set. We can. If the environment around us changed and we don't accomplish these goals, we adjust, we do better next time, even though we've let some people down. But it also sets up a higher chance of us being successful in the first place if we do, a public commitment on our own, saying, everyone, this is what I'm going to deliver. But that's hard to say. It's hard to say, I'm going to deliver X at Y, and then you'll tell me Z. I'm going to deliver you this feature on this date, and then immediately after I'm done, I want you to tell me how I did. It's hard to do that. It's hard to put ourselves in that position. But the mark of a professional isn't just how we perform under that accountability, it's how we handle the success or failure of that goal and learning more so that we're better the next time. The last topic here is learning. And this is the most interesting one to me. As software developers, we always have this pressure on ourselves to learn more. There's always new things to learn, and we like learning. We like learning new languages, philosophies, technologies. And we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be constantly learning these things. Continuous learning is what we're all about. We also live in a time where we can find out about anything we want in a split second, right? We have the internet, we have the web all around us. It's great. We have a wealth of information available at our fingertips on the web. So this must be good for learning, right? We must be like incredible learners now. Not really. Research shows we're actually getting worse at learning. What the web of information tends to do, based on what researchers are finding, is shift the way we learn and how our brains work. It encourages our brain's natural tendency to find, the most comfortable path, the happiest path through all this information. What we have is a choice between this. We have a choice between Hacker News or Reddit or whatever your preferred medium is, or something like this, a more in-depth, dense book or paper or article on the web. That's the choice that our brains have. And our brains are always going to make the easiest choice, right? This is an easy choice for our brains to make. They're going to, go through Hacker News and click through, real easy. That's an easy choice. Brains like clicking. Brains love clicking because it's a rush of dopamine, right? We have all this potential for new exciting things. Our brains are just fiends looking for that next hit of dopamine. So we click from place to place, trying to gather, as much breadth of information as we can, finding new and exciting things. And what this, pits against is our working memory versus our long-term memory. This begins to trick us into thinking that there's no need to dive deep into any of these topics that we want to learn. All we need to do is catalog a list of ideas, where to learn them, where to learn about those ideas, and offload that memory of those ideas into the web itself. We don't actually have to learn in depth about any of this. The problem is that it actively works against our memory. That's not how our memory works. We can think of our memory as divided into two parts. We have our working memory, which is like our scratch pad. It's where we write down all the things we're thinking of consciously. It's like our files, and our long-term memory is like our file system. This is where the things go for long-term storage. And it takes the brain time and effort to transfer things from our conscious working memory into our long-term memory. And once our working memory is overwhelmed, the transfer to long-term memory slows down. So what we do with this web of information is we overload our working memory and prevent things from transferring into long-term memory. And researchers at UCLA were looking into this problem, how the web affects the way our brain works. And our brain is incredibly plastic. And they found that this normal use case of the web is this mode of learning is not very effective. It's making our brains worse because our brains are highly plastic. They concluded that using the web in learning by skimming is weakening the parts of our brain used for deep thinking. They said the neural circuits devoted to scanning, skimming, and multitasking are expanding and strengthening, while those used for reading and thinking deeply with sustained concentration are weakening or eroding. So it was a really interesting finding. They could actually demonstrate that our brains can change and are changing based on how we use them with the web. A similar study at Stanford declared that the web is making us suckers for irrelevancy. So as much as we like skimming and browsing, as much as it makes our brains happy, when it comes to learning, we need to seek out the stress that comes with turning down that dopamine fix. And we need to digest information in a more stressful manner and avoid that happy dopamine fix that comes with endlessly clicking, reading those blog posts. As a final example, 2003 Dutch psychologists began a really interesting study that the BBC called one of the most interesting examinations of current computer use and the potential downsides of increasing reliance on screen-based interaction with information systems. And what the study actually involved was two groups, as most studies involve. Each group was tasked with solving a logic puzzle on a computer. But while one group used software designed to be as helpful as possible, had on-screen assistance, visual cues, for instance. The other group used, a bare-bones software implementation. It was really unhelpful, provided no hints or guidance. To start off, the group using the helpful software made correct moves more quickly. They were better at solving the problems to start. But as the game went on, the group using the more unhelpful software were actually able to solve the problems more quickly with fewer incorrect moves. The group using the unhelpful software actually became better at planning ahead and plotting strategy, while the group using the helpful software frequently ran into blocks along the way, clicked around aimlessly trying to crack the puzzle. Not only that, but 2 months after the initial test, the group using the unhelpful software was able to solve the puzzles twice as fast as the other group. And while the study determined that unhelpful software, in this case doing the more stressful thing, can make us better, he concluded that as we externalize problem solving and other cognitive chores to our computers, we reduce our brain's ability to build stable knowledge and structures that can later be applied in new situations. And while this is an interesting implication for us as software developers, right, this unhelpful software idea, we're going to save that for another time. What this actually says about our discussion of stress is that our usual approach is that we usually approach the ideas of continuous learning from the wrong perspective, right? We like to do things that are easy. We like to go for breadth over depth. There's all these new technologies we want to learn. We want to learn all of them right now. And our brains are happy when somebody mentions a new technology, and we can at least recall, that we've heard about this. We don't want to tell them that no, we know nothing about this. It's much more stressful to admit to ourselves that no, we know nothing about any of these topics. But we're working really hard on understanding this one topic right now. Can be something, that we can say in response, right? We don't have to know a little about a lot of things. We can, dedicate ourselves to one thing, apply more stress, and filtering out all these distractions, and apply that stress by diving deep into one topic. By going all in and finding the gaps in our knowledge and taking the time to fill them in and filter out the noise of all these distractions, we actively engage our long-term memory much better and become better learners. So, what are our tools? What have we concluded after looking at these 3 topics in relation to how increased stress can make us better software developers? Well, in general, our tools are kind of vague. We have awareness and we have action. These are our tools that we can apply to ourselves, just like we apply to our software to make us better at handling stress. We can apply smarter monitoring to your signals, right? Awareness of the biases that our brain employs during stress. We can think about, is this signal trying to comfort us? Is our brain just trying to comfort us and make my brain happy? Are we slowing down enough to think about whether we're doing something because it serves our goals we've set, or is it simply giving our brains a quick dopamine fix and avoiding some momentary stress? Filtering out the noise like that go along with these alerts that go in our head while we're working is part of the awareness that can benefit us. The second is action, right? Erring on the side of action, embracing the stressful moments, fixing our own bugs when we find them, acting with accountability, setting goals with others to hold you accountable, setting deadlines for yourself, increasing the stress involved, and getting better in all these things that we want to do. We can embrace that stress and err on the side of action. Assuming they're momentary, right? Chronic stress is a real thing, and it's unhealthy. So just like we filter out all those other signals, we want to be aware of when this signal is telling us that this is chronic stress. This is, uncontrolled rather than the controlled stress that we're looking for to make ourselves better. And in the end, what this all shows is that comfort is really a trap, right? We know this. We know we have to subject ourselves to these stressful moments. We have to subject our software to this stress to make it better. So our best solution is to work at finding a better stress, not avoiding stress altogether, but getting better at stress. Putting ourselves in positions to be stressed, having the awareness to filter out the noise in the moment, and reaping the benefits of that hard, stressful experience. That's it. my name's Kevin. If you have questions about this, you can get at me on Twitter. That's where I'm located on Twitter, or just come find me afterward. I'd be happy to discuss and answer questions about any of this. So thank you.